right, so if we want to find the zeros of a polynomial, that is the same thing as finding the x-intercepts for the polynomial or for the function. And so remember that the x-intercepts are where we cross the x-axis, and when we are crossing the x-axis, our y is equal to 0. So this whole thing about finding the zeros of the function is really the same thing as figuring out where y is equal to 0 or where f of x is equal to 0. All right, so if you look at a question like number 45 here, in number 45, they give you a function f of x is equal to x cubed minus 5x squared minus 4x plus 20. And it asks us to find the zeros of the polynomial. So to find those zeros, we are first going to say, okay, zeros, we need to set the function equal to 0. So I take and set this function equal to 0. Now, because it is a polynomial equations are going to be solved by trying to factor. So once we get this thing set equal to 0, we then have to try to factor it. Now, when you think about factoring, the first thing you should always ask yourself is there a GCF? And when you look here, x cubed, x squared, x to the first constant, there are no x's in common there. If you look at the number part of it, 1, 5, 4, 20, nothing in common to pull out. So the GCF is done. So then what I like to think about is how many terms do we have? Because how many terms we have is really going to determine what type of method we use. So when we have 3 terms, what we usually try to do is the first times the last, sum up to the middle. And when we have 4 terms, what we usually try to do is go through our grouping method. So I don't have a GCF, so then I go to how many terms do I have? And we look here and I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. And so because I have 4 terms, I'm going to try to go through grouping. So I look at the first 2 terms and I say to myself, what is common to those 2 terms? So we have an x squared that is common to both terms. And remember, when you're trying to find this GCF for both of the terms, you're really looking at the smallest exponent. So we're going to take out an x squared, and when we take out an x squared, we are dividing both of these terms by x squared. So we divide this by x squared, divide this by x squared. And what we're left over with is x minus 5. All right, now the thing is, for grouping to work, if we get an x minus 5 from the first group, that means we have to get an x minus 5 from the second group. So when you look at the negative 4x plus 20, if I'm going to somehow figure out how to get x minus 5 here, I can take what I have. So I currently have negative 4x, and I can divide that by what I want to get. So from the first term, I want to somehow get an x. So I take the negative 4x and divide it by what I want, which is x, and that will tell me exactly what I need to pull out from this second group to get the x minus 5. So when I take what I have divided by what I want, that is showing me that I want to bring out a negative 4. And you'll notice that if you take out the negative 4, you do get negative 4x plus 20 when you FOIL it out. All right, so now once I have my GCF pulled out from each of those 2 groups, and I have this x minus 5 common to both of these groups, I can then bring out the x minus 5, and that will leave me with x squared and negative 4 as the other set of parentheses. So this will be x squared minus 4 equals 0. Now, it is finally factored. So we went through GCF, we went through 4 terms grouping, it's factored. And so now that it's factored, we set each of those factors equal to 0. Now, when you set the factors equal to 0, this is a linear equation. It's x to the first, so that is very straightforwardly solved by adding 5 to both sides and getting x is equal to 5. When you look at the second equation, it is true you could factor this further into a difference of 2 squares, but also you have a square power. So this could have been solved either by a difference of 2 squares, or we can simply add the 4 to both sides and then take the square root of both sides to undo that square power. Now, do remember, when you have a square power, that means that you have to have 2 answers. So when you take the square root, it's not just going to be 2. It's going to be a plus and a minus 2, so that you do in fact have 2 answers coming from the squared equation. So those are the zeros. We have 5 as a 0, and we have 2 and negative 2 as a 0. So again, in summary, we are finding the zeros for the polynomial by factoring. There's a lot of work that goes on to get it factored. Once it's factored, we set them equal to 0, and those give us the zeros of the polynomial.